Hey guys, it's Brad the Buff. I got my buff on my head and I'm ready to go. Today I want to talk about how I failed at my most recent hike of the Allegheny Trail. I was so excited about it. My just last video about this through hike I had planned. I wanted to go through some of the things that happened, some of the mistakes I made, and just exactly why I wasn't able to complete and had to bow on the trip just 3 days in. And I want to talk about it in this video. Let me start off by saying I had a great 3 days out on the trail. I really enjoyed myself. I was putting in some long distance miles. There were so many wonderful things to see. Some of my highlights were the Raptor Observatory, stopping to get ice cream in Gap Mills. I really enjoyed parts, surprisingly, of the road walk, camping in Mon Cove State Park, staying at Graham's Shelter, watching just the sun come up through the pines several of the mornings. I had a great time. But as I started the trip, my first big mistake was I checked all of my gear twice. I was super nervous going out the door. I made sure I had everything except my hiking shoes. I left my hiking shoes at home. That's my Solomon 4s. I don't know what I was thinking. I usually wear sandals to begin, when I'm driving down, and I put my hiking shoes on just before I started. And of all the things to forget your hiking shoes is kind of an important deal. I actually bought a pair of running shoes, a pair of New Balance on the way down. I didn't have enough time to turn around, go get my shoes. I was already a couple hours into the drive, and it would have screwed up my entire itinerary to have to go back, get the shoes, come back again. I would have had to move days. I didn't have time for that. So the first big mistake that I made was wearing a pair of shoes I'd never worn before and not having my typical hiking shoes that I knew what they could do very well, especially for a trip with this many miles on it. That was a rookie mistake that I wish I hadn't made. And I suffered some consequences from it. I got pretty massive blisters day one. Usually I heal pretty well from blisters. I'm pretty accustomed to them. They don't bother me that much. But the fact that my shoes also weren't waterproof, they didn't have a lot of support, my feet never really got dry. This trail is not a super well-traveled trail. You're hiking through a lot of undergrowth. And in the morning, you're going to have a lot of dew that's sticking to your feet. So that was my first huge mistake. The second part of my trip is I was not getting good rest. I wasn't fully sure of why that was. I thought I was maybe anxious and nervous. Monday, I started to lose my appetite. And that is not typical for me on a hiking trip. Usually I get hungrier as the days wear on. Tuesday, I had almost zero appetite. I had to force myself to eat breakfast. I had to force myself to eat dinner. And on Wednesday, I was cramming food down my throat. I did not want any part of it. And so I knew that something was very wrong. I didn't know exactly what, but I didn't feel like my normal self. And so when Wednesday rolled around, I wasn't eating food. I had massive blisters. And I just felt wrong on the inside. There were a few other mistakes. I wish I had brought gaiters. If I had brought knee-high gaiters, that would have helped significantly. Knowing that there's some undergrowth on this trail, or overgrowth, however you want to say it, knowing that you're going to have to go over some tree downs, it is important that if you're going to do this trail, you have to bring gaiters that come up knee-high. I had to go through large sections of stinging nettles that just tore me apart and really aggravated me for hours on end of the trip. And so not bringing the gaiters was a piece of gear that I really should have thought ahead of and brought. But as of Wednesday midday, I knew that I was going to have a hard time getting into my planned place at night, keeping pace without stopping at all. So I knew I was going to have to push hard for the entirety of that day. which I was capable of doing, but would have been a pretty rough day. But with the way that I was feeling, I was having a really hard time imagining recovering for the next day. And so I just rang in the trip. I don't believe it's a very good idea. Pushing through your pain, that's a good idea. If you're uncomfortable, that's a good idea. But when you know something's wrong and you're not feeling right, it is not a smart idea to take risks on the trail. And I knew something was wrong. So I called the trip in. A good friend of mine came and picked me up and took me back. That night, the fever hit. Apparently, I'd got meningitis while I was on the trail. I'm not sure if it was from tick bites or if it might have been contamination from water, but I got some form of meningitis. In fact, I'm still recovering now. I feel way better than I have since then, but I was bedridden for the next 4 days with a high fever, massive headaches, and if you've ever had meningitis, you can't move your neck at all. Everything hurts. And so I made the right call. I was super glad that I did call it in, because I would have been suffering with meningitis on the trail just trying to figure out a way to get in contact with someone to come bring me home. If I'd had a longer trip, I think I could have just waited it out, but my trip was pretty condensed. I didn't have a lot of wiggle room, which was my next big mistake. I planned this trip way too tight. I had a lot of big miles days. I've done a lot of big mile days. I'm comfortable with big mile days. But the problem on the big mile days is it becomes very difficult to plan if anything goes wrong. If you get a lot of blisters or you don't sleep so well one night, there is no way to recover that time. If you're doing 24, 26, 28 miles a day, that means you're hiking 12, 13, 14 miles a day, or hours a day. And by hiking 12, 13, 14 hours a day means if you're going to be hiking in daylight, which is pretty essential for this trail, then that means that there really is no room for you to stop and take long breaks to help with your recovery, that if things aren't going right, that if you get lost a little bit, to take time to think about it. And so putting that many miles and forcing myself to hike that many miles a day with no alternative to reset things if they didn't go well, and I only had essentially 13 days to do the trick. I didn't get tripped. I didn't give myself extra days on the back end or the front end. I had to be back. And because of that, I really had no room for error. And so if I was going to do this trip again, I probably would take the miles down to maybe 22 max, maybe hit the 16 to 22 miles a day range. I think that gives you a little bit of time where some days you're going to make it in 8 hours, 9 hours. You have plenty of time for breaks, but then that gives you more time to recover. But if you're hiking for 14 hours, then by definition, you make it in, you've only got an additional 10 hours to sleep, get up, and get on the trail again before you have to turn it all back around. That's not a whole lot of recovery time. And so condensing my trip that much and putting that much hiking in with very little room for error was a mistake on a trail that I wasn't familiar with and that I hadn't done before. And so all of those things combined taught me a lot. I would like to hit this trail again. I'm probably going to section hike the sections first. I think that's another thing I've learned, is I'd like to get familiar with these sections, and then I'll probably at some point try to reattempt a through hike. I'm really looking forward to it. Like I said, there's a lot of beautiful things. I am going to do a video of my time out and then do another video just talking about some of my experiences from the trail. But if you're going to do this trail, I would highly, highly recommend knee-high gaiters. I think that's very important. That's one of the big lessons that I learned. And I'd also give yourself some room, because even though the trail is blazed extremely well, there are blazes everywhere. There is a lot of high growth in areas of the trail. For about 4 miles before Graham Shelter to about 2 miles after, there was a lot of high growth. Running through the last 5 or 6 miles out to I believe it's the Laurel trailhead, up from there it was great. But then once again you start a climb, it started to get pretty hairy, pretty thick again. So you either need to wear pants or gaiters, and you do need to have a familiarity, especially if you're doing the what they call the road walk. I did end up doing, I believe it was about 67 miles. I did about 7 miles of section 2, and I completed all of section 1 with the road walk. Well, except for there's about 3 miles. You join when you do the road walk. You join section 4 north at about 3 miles and a quarter, 3 miles and 3/4 in. So I missed 3 miles and 3/4 that I didn't get to do, and because I did the road walk instead. And then I did about 7 miles of section 1 in, and that's where I had to call it in. But anyways, it was a good experience for me. I did learn a lot, and I really am super glad that I called it in when I did. When you know something isn't right, you're not having fun. I didn't know what wasn't right, but I could tell something was going on. So I would highly suggest that if you're not having fun on your trip, don't force yourself into a bad situation unless that's the kind of trip you're looking for, which some people are. I was trying to set the fastest known time, but that wasn't the main reason I was on the trail. That was a very subsidiary reason for me to do it. And so, you know, they say hike your own hike, and I did that, but I'm glad I did because I found out that I was actually quite ill. I just didn't know it at the time. My adrenaline was running high. But I just wanted to give you guys a quick explanation about what happened to me, why I did had to call the trip. And like I said, I'm glad I did, but I will be back out there. And I'm excited to hit up more of the Allegheny Trail, see what it has to hold for me. And I'm really excited to put out the section of the trip that I did. I got some great stuff on tape for you guys. So I'll see you guys next video. Hey guys, if you like the video you just saw, please subscribe, click the bell so you can get alerted for any new videos that I may do, and check the links below for any information I described in the video. I'll try to put as much there as possible. Thanks for watching.